Welcome to the Far and Beyond podcast, hosted by the Contracts and Fiscal Law Department of the Judge Advocate General's Legal Center and School. This podcast is specifically for federal government attorneys navigating the complex world of acquisition. I'm Major Ellie Sewell.
And I'm Major Jason Floyd. Together, we are your co-hosts. And we've got a massive topic today, the history of government contracting leading up to the FAR, and of course, the revolutionary changes announced just recently.
Exactly. For us attorneys, understanding the why behind the regulation is often just as important as the what's.
Ellie, let's start today at the very beginning of the what then. What did government contracting look like before we had standardized regulations?
The FAR might seem like an intimidating document today, but its very existence represents the culmination of over 2 centuries of responding to catastrophic failure in federal buying with increasingly stringent rules. The earliest attempts at procurement control date back to before the nation was even founded, specifically during the French and Indian War, where control relied primarily on merchants who were paid a commission, often 5%, on everything they spent for the army.
And that commission structure immediately established a conflict of interest. Spoiler alert, setting the wrong precedent where higher spending meant higher profit. This practice of favoritism and nepotism was so common that regulatory intervention was quite slow to arrive.
This chaos peaked during the Revolutionary War. It was amplified by the Continental Congress's limited authority to tax or enforce laws binding the states. But following the Revolution, Alexander Hamilton asserted a key legal principle. When the government enters a contract, it exchanges its role as legislator for that of a moral agent with the same rights and obligations as an individual.
I'm surprised you didn't break out in song when you said Alexander Hamilton. All right, so the initial reaction to that massive misuse of funds by figures like Robert Morris was highly bureaucratic. When widespread corruption was revealed, Congress mandated detailed record keeping for every single purchase, down to the color of livestock, specifically to prevent fraud.
So that regulatory backlash, however, ended up stifling efficiency, as you can imagine. It took years before Robert Morris, returning to the public life in 1781, finally imposed a modern standard by seeking competitive proposals as requiring contractors to be men of substance and talent who could actually fulfill their contracts, a necessary move toward regulating responsibility.
And that push for formality eventually led to an act of March 3rd, 1809, which was the first true government-wide procurement statute. It formally required purchases to be made for advertising or open purchase to guarantee the benefits of competition.
So wow, we've actually been doing that for over 200 years now, if you think about it.
Yeah, that's crazy. I would not have guessed a responsibility determination was as old as time.
No, I did not. That was a surprise for me.
Yeah.
And so those early rules were further solidified by the Army's General Regulations of 1825, which explicitly mandated giving all the proposers access to proposal details and required performance bonds for contractors. So meanwhile, administrative regulations led to huge strides in industrial practice. The Ordnance Department gained sweeping authority in 1815 to create a unified procurement system that included the mandatory enforcement of interchangeable parts.
And that was actually a pretty huge win. This regulatory standard mandated rigorous inspections, which drove unprecedented QC, or quality control, meaning the phrase close enough for government work originally referred to excellence, and that diffused across the economy.
So not lowest price technically acceptable anymore?
Sadly not.
So despite these evolving structures, the quest for profit remained toxic. For instance, the massive contracts needed for westward expansion led directly to the Indian Trust Fund scandal. A congressional investigation condemned Secretary of War Floyd for issuing...
Who?
Any relation?
No.
Are you sure?
I have no idea.
So, condemned Secretary of War Floyd for issuing unauthorized acceptances, confirming the public's conviction that contractors were unscrupulous.
Sounds like a bad dude. Don't know him. So that environment, though, of widespread corruption during the Civil War demanded severe statutory remedies. In 1863, Congress passed the False Claims Act, which we all know and love today, imposing criminal and civil liability for fraud and creating the influential qui tam bounties system to incentivize citizens to expose those abuses. Further, the Anti-Fraud Act of 1862 imposed a regulatory burden requiring written contracts over $500 to be formally filed with an affidavit of authenticity.
So the core legal pillar for peacetime procurement emerged in the mid-19th century. The landmark law revised Statute 3709 of 1860. This statute mandated formal advertising for bids for all supplies and services unless a public exigency required immediate delivery, establishing a standard that persisted for nearly a century. This was reinforced by administrative rules such as General Order Number 97 of 1867, which began strictly emphasizing competitive bids and awarding contracts to the lowest bidder.
That system was caught in a perpetual contradiction, though. The strict fairness on one hand, mandated by the regulation, versus the speed demanded by war. So during World War I, in order to get complex modern weapons like tanks and aircraft built, the foundational competitive bidding requirements were actually suspended. The National Defense Act of 1916 granted the president sweeping authority to demand orders, take precedence, and authorize the seizure of plants if companies refused orders at the fair price, essentially suspending that revised statute 3709.
Exactly. The military response to industrial warfare was the creation of powerful regulatory bodies, including economic czars and the War Industries Board. This wartime regulation was necessary, but it highlighted the system's reliance on suspending its core rules to function efficiently during a crisis.
What happened next was actually pretty interesting to me. So following the war, several major socioeconomic laws were codified into the contracting process, including the Buy American Act of 1933, the Walsh-Healy Public Contracts Act of 1936. This layering of requirements showed that government contracting was being increasingly used as an instrument for social and economic policy and not just buying what we needed.
The push for uniformity intensified mid-century, driven by contradictions and massive uncoordinated paperwork from various agencies. This era established key regulatory mechanisms. The Armed Services Procurement Act, or ASPA, of 1947 began standardizing military procurement, leading directly to the Armed Services Procurement Regulation, the ASPR.
The ASPR is an oldie but goodie.
Then, in the 1960s, Congress added another layer of pricing regulation with the Truth in Negotiations Act, TINA, of 1962, requiring contractors to provide certified cost and pricing data for negotiated contracts. So prior to the FAR system being established, we primarily operated under a bifurcated system. Civilian agencies generally followed the Federal Procurement Regulation, FPR, while the Department of War used Defense Acquisition Regulation, the DAR, which itself was the successor to the ASPR. Some other agencies like NASA and the Central Intelligence Agency even maintained their own semi-autonomous procurement regulations.
Yeah, Ellie, I gotta be honest, that sounds like the definition of mass and maze. So how did we finally transition from that complex bifurcated framework to a single uniform system?
So the transformation really began with the Commission on Government Procurement, established in 1969. In its 1972 report, the Commission highlighted this very problem: the burdensome mass and maze of procurement and procurement-related regulations, and the total absence of an effective overall system for coordinating control and standardizing regulations.
So that's what provided the necessary impetus for the reforms, right?
Yeah, it did, yes. So Congress responded with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy Act amendments of 1979, which authorized the administrator of the OFPP with OMB concurrence to issue policy directives aimed at promoting a uniform procurement system. That directly led to the FAR. The OFPP subsequently released Policy Letter 80-5, which formally established the Federal Acquisition Regulation System, stating that the system would include a single FAR, issued jointly by the GSA, DOW, and NASA.
Sounds good for contractors, that's for sure. So when did the FAR finally arrive, cementing the uniformity?
So the FAR was initially published as a final rule on September 19th, 1983, and officially took effect on April 1st.
Oh, wow.
That's a great date for them to have chosen. It was issued through the Office of Federal Procurement Policy Act of 1974, and it continues to be jointly issued and maintained by the Department of War, GSA, and NASA.
Oh, yeah, that's a FAR Council, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as attorneys, we deal constantly with amendments. How is the FAR officially maintained and updated today?
So the FAR is amended through a rigorous rulemaking process, typically managed jointly by the DOW, GSA, and NASA, acting on behalf of the FAR Council.
Ah.
Yep. So the FAR Council consists of the administrator of OFPP, who chairs it, the Secretary of War, the NASA administrator, and the GSA administrator. The rulemaking procedures are codified primarily at 41 U.S.C. 1707 and are similar to the APA's notice and comment procedures.
Oh, interesting. That's right. These are not subject to APA, notice and comment. There's a little bit of a difference.
Yes, similar, but different. This process generally requires publishing a proposed rule in the Federal Register, and then that final rule cannot generally take effect until at least 60 days after publication, though urgent circumstances can shorten this period to 30 days.
Sure. And the entire process for amending the FAR can take anywhere from, months to years?
Yes, that's right. Additionally, proposed changes are reviewed by OMB's Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs.
Oh, IRA.
Yep. And OFPP to ensure consistency with law and administrative policies.
All right, so we talked about history, we talked about scope, we talked about how the FAR is amended generally. That brings us to arguably the largest change in recent memory, the Revolutionary FAR Overhaul, or RFO. What's the primary goal of the massive effort, Ellie?
So this is described as the biggest FAR overhaul in 40 years. The core goal is deregulation and modernization. The overhaul seeks to minimize the regulatory hoops contractors must jump through. So the administration hopes that by clearing out red tape, these changes will spur increased participation by innovative small business manufacturers and new market entrants who previously found the process too burdensome. So the stated objectives is to return the FAR to its statutory roots, moving from rules built for paperwork to rules built for performance.
If the concern is efficiency, that certainly sounds promising. What are the immediate practical changes we need to advise our agencies and clients on, Ellie?
So immediately, agencies have been authorized to begin eliminating 1/3 of the requirements from future contracts that are not statutorily or executively mandated and have little relevance to contractual outcomes. So the FAR Council has already removed over 500 requirements, with an expectation that more than 1,000 requirements will be eliminated by the time the overhaul is complete.
So beyond this elimination, there's also consolidation and retirement, right? FAR Parts 38 and 51 have been officially retired. Also, policies on information and supply chain security are being centralized into a single FAR part, making requirements easier for both acquisition workforce and contractors to locate.
Yes, they are eliminating outdated processes such as paper-based pricing lists and duplicative contract approvals.
Plus, we're seeing common sense changes being implemented to make it easier for contractors to sign up and maintain their registration with the federal government in the System for Award Management, or SAM.
And I know that's been an issue in the past.
Oh, 100%. Lots of protests.
Yes.
So that covers deregulation. How is the RFO planning to streamline the actual buying process, though?
So that's where the focus on category management comes in. The OFPP is directing agencies to use government-wide contracts, or GWACs, specifically those categorized as best in class or preferred, to satisfy common commercial needs rather than relying on individual agency-level contracts.
So now the emphasis is on mandatory use of these pre-vetted contracts, is that it?
Yeah, that's the direction they're going. So currently, best-in-class contracts are preferred government-wide solutions because they meet the high standards of pricing and performance. Under the RFO, OFPP plans to establish new criteria for these contracts, and agencies will be required to fulfill their needs initially through best-in-class contracts. If those don't meet the need, then they can look to preferred contracts before establishing their own agency-specific solution.
And to help implement all these changes, figuring out whether that's best in class or preferred or all that stuff, I understand OFPP and the FAR Council are releasing new strategic guidance documents. What are those and what's their purpose?
So the OFPP and the FAR Council are releasing 3 documents that collectively form the Strategic Acquisition Guidance, or SAG. They aim to accelerate the adoption of these innovative practices. The 3 parts are first, the FAR Companion Guide, which provides strategic how-to tips and insights from experienced practitioners. Second, the Practitioners' Albums, which offer tested learning tools to accelerate the adoption of innovative practices. And finally, the Category Guide, which includes practical advice specifically for utilizing the best-in-class and preferred contracts.
Well, that's a lot. That seems like a lot of different places to go find stuff. What do we think? What's the consensus so far on how it's going and how it's going to go?
So I've looked through a few of the FAR parts that have changed. I do like some of them. I think the organization's a little bit better.
I agree.
Easier to follow along, especially like FAR Part 15 specifically. Is a lot. It just
streamlined.
It was streamlined. It was a lot easier to find specific topics that I needed.
Sure.
So I'm interested. I'm not sure though, because it's not statutory changes. So I'm not sure how much is going to get streamlined when we're not changing the statute. We're just changing the wording that we're using. So we'll see once the DOW actually implements these changes, they accept them.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what kinds of protest issues and have we anticipated these things, because whereas we were told like, hey, KOs, you will use this checklist, essentially, right? Not verbatim, but you will use this checklist. There's not a lot of discretion there, but that may be a good thing when you don't have a big team to litigate all the discretionary issues in a bid protest, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see. It'll be fun. It's a good time to be in contracts.
It's definitely a good time to be an attorney because I feel like job security.
That's right. Okay, so let's wrap up. That covers a lot of ground, Allie, right? So from the original commission structures in the French and Indian Wars to the massive RFO of 2025, it really has been a revolutionary journey for federal procurement.
Exactly. It's been interesting learning about the history of the FAR and then even before the FAR and how many changes have happened since even before the creation of the United States when it comes to procurement. We've always needed to buy things specifically for the Army. They need to be fed, they need to be clothed, they need to be housed. So
the Air Force does not need those things.
No.
Just kidding.
We just need 5-star hotels.
Oh, God.
So it's been fun to see how procurement has changed through the years, how many times they've created some kind of act or legislation to try and fix it, and then in 50 years they have to almost do it again.
Sure.
I feel like this is just another iteration of that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think there are some new lessons to be learned, though. That's for sure. So thanks, Allie. I guess that's all the time we have for today.
Thank you for joining us today in this episode of Far and Beyond. Please make sure to follow us and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We love to hear from our listeners. Please continue to reach out to us on Facebook and LinkedIn. The information can be found in the show notes from today's episode. The views expressed today are those of the presenters, not that of the Judge Advocate General Corps, the Department of the Army, the Department of the Air Force, or the Department of War.